machine doesn't run away. Yeah, just that one, yeah. All right, so hold on, just adjust this for the video. Try and make sure that it's in screen, but also that I'm in screen. All right, good. Good afternoon, I guess it is, now that we are in daylight savings time. It's still light again rather than dark. But we're going to be dealing with a serious topic today. This is coincidental. My wife was joking. Am I talking about the afterlife and the end of the world because of the coronavirus? No. It's just I like to alternate between some of the practical commandments like kashrut and some of the beliefs of Judaism, in this case, the afterlife, so that there's a variety of topics and you sort of get a feel for all the different aspects of Judaism as we go through the course. So the afterlife, also known as what happens when you die. Very popular topic. Okay, so who are we listening to about the afterlife? Where do we get our information about this? Because I'll tell you, nobody who's died has come back to tell us what it's like. So what do we use? Well, we have the Tanakh, we have the Bible. Excuse me, is this Penelope telling me there's a problem? She usually does. Tell me, but quiet. Nope, I think there's no problem, but it's just my phone is being annoying at the wrong time. Okay, so back on track. So we have the Tanakh, we have the Bible. But when you read through the Bible, what happens? It never clearly explains the afterlife. It says, and Abraham dies and he was gathered to his ancestors. What does that mean? We don't know exactly. It doesn't give us a clear description. Even when you read through the books of the prophets, it never says, this is exactly what happens when you die. It never says that clearly. Well, early rabbinic writings. Well, in the Mishnah, in the Midrash, in the Talmud, there are discussions about certain aspects of what happens after a person dies, but it is not like somebody sat down and wrote a very nice, clear book explaining chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. It's just pieces here and there, glimpses of what it is like. So too in later rabbinic writings that came after the Talmud was finished, again, it's not universal and systematically understood. The only place where you see somebody who writes an actual book that says, this is what happens immediately after die, and then you do this, and then you do this, those are only in the books of idiots. Because there are lots of people who write books that they think will tell you, I know what happens when you die, and I'm going to give you the secret. Just give me 1995, and I will tell you how you will navigate the next world into the paradise, blah, 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 blah. It's a sales pitch. Judaism does not give a clear, perfect picture of the next life. And there's a reason for that, right? Why is Judaism so fuzzy on some of these details? Well, because the purpose of the Torah and the Brit, the covenant with us and God, is to connect us to God in this world, in this life. And when we do, that improves our lives, it improves the world around us, and it improves the souls that are part of us that we'll talk about that are immortal, right? Well, if that's the purpose, then why do I care what happens next? Why do I need to have that explained? I need more information about how to live today, not how to die tomorrow. Because tomorrow, when I'm dead, that I'm not in control of. What I'm in control of is, what do I do with my life today? And so the Torah, the Tanakh, the rabbinic writings all focus on how do you live your life, not what happens when you're not alive. The afterlife exists in ways that are completely different from our own lives and experiences. The afterlife does not have time. The afterlife does not have space. The afterlife doesn't have bodies. So how do we talk about it? How do we understand it? Our brain cannot even put it into a proper framework. So what do we use? We use poetry, we use metaphor, we use analogies, we use all sorts of comparisons. We talk around it to help people understand. But ultimately, because it's not the primary purpose, you don't find the rabbis sitting and debating for years the afterlife. They'll debate for years how to keep Shabbat, how to be honest in business, how to speak to one another. That they'll debate for years. But the afterlife, well, that's a smaller discussion. So, even though this is an important topic, even though this is an interesting topic, in many ways, this topic is not as important as what we studied last week about keeping kosher. Right? Even though this one, you're going to find a lot more movies made about this than you're going to find about keeping kosher. It's still not the most important thing in life because it's not in life. Make sense? Okay. So, what do we kind of know? And why do we not bother to talk about this? Well, there's a great teaching in Shabbat 151b. That means it's in the Talmud. For a day-old infant, they desecrate Shabbat. Right? That means if a newborn baby, right, just out of the mother, and back in the day, a newborn baby, you wouldn't always count on the baby surviving because babies died a lot thousands of years ago. For a newborn baby, you would desecrate Shabbat, which means do anything necessary. If you have to cut down a tree, if you have to start a fire, if you have to do any of the things on Shabbat that we don't normally do, you would do it to save the life of that baby. Absolutely. Right? As it says from the Torah's teachings, desecrate for him a single Shabbat so that he may keep many Shabbatot, right? If I save his life, then next week and the week after, the baby will be able to have Shabbat for many, many years. So you break one Shabbat to save his life and let him have the rest of his life. But for David, king of Israel, in death, they don't desecrate Shabbat. If David died on Shabbat, we would leave his body where it was. We wouldn't begin doing any of the preparations until after Shabbat was over. Because when you're dead, you're dead. Right? Once a person dies, the religious duties no longer affect for him, or no longer take effect. That is in line with what Rabbi Yochanan said, free among the dead, taken from Psalms 88. When a person dies, he is free of religious duties. The mitzvot, the Torah, tell us how to do our duty when we are alive. When we are dead, we have no more duties because we're dead. And that means that for a baby, we would do more than for a king. Make sense? Because the baby's alive, the king is dead. Long live the king. Okay, so even though it's not the most important thing, and even though there's a lot of discussion and a lot of fuzziness, there are some general areas of agreement where we can get some clear understanding. And around these three different ideas, we're going to find a lot of consensus, a lot of agreement around the notion of judgment, the notion of reward and punishment, and the idea of there being a life, a existence after you die. So we're going to go through each one of these different categories. Everyone with me so far? Okay. Judgment. God is the judge of all the world. The Tanakh says this everywhere, in all the prophets, in the Psalms, and the Torah. God is the creator of the world. God is the judge of the world. And all that lives is expected to follow the laws of God. Right? There are certain laws for Jews, and there are certain laws for non-Jews, a lot fewer laws, but we do expect that the whole world will be just, will follow God's laws in order to live a good life. Those that do not are judged as for having missed the mark, and those that do are judged for having followed the correct path. Right? Again, to come back to our little conversation before we started, the only reason you can judge is because you have a choice, because you have freedom. Right? You could go to good, you could go to evil. If you go to evil, you're going to be judged as making that choice. If you go to good, you will be judged as making that choice. So far, so good? Okay. So that leads then, once you've been judged, to the notion that there will be reward and there will be punishment. Right? Throughout the Tanakh, the main idea is that the good we do will lead to benefit in this life. The bad we do will lead to harm for ourselves and others in this life. The benefit and harm will outlive us as well. So when you read through the Tanakh and it says you should keep these commandments so it will be good for you, what the Torah means is that it will make your life better. Right? If you are honest in business, your life will be better than if you are a crook. That is a general rule in Judaism. If you are good to your parents, remember, good to your parents, then your life will be better, and so will their life be better. That is what Judaism mainly focuses on, that there is benefit and there is harm from being a good or bad person in this world. It's not always easy to see. It's not always, I ate some bacon and so a lightning bolt hit me. Not like that. But keeping the commandments leads to a better person and leads to a better life. Breaking the commandments leads to a worse person and a worse life. And my goodness affects everyone else around me and will affect my community after I'm gone. And my badness will also affect the people around me and the community after me. However, passages such as the final chapter of Isaiah indicate that there is punishment and reward beyond this life as well, that the scales will be balanced to account for leftover debts. So the basic idea is, if you do something good in this world, but you don't actually get a reward in this world, God owes you, right? You did something good. You are still waiting to collect on the reward for having done something good. If you didn't get it today, then you'll get it after you have passed. But the same is also true if you did something wrong. If you did something wrong and you did not seek forgiveness, you did not repent, you did not change your way, you did not fix your mistake, and you didn't have any punishment in this life, eventually you have to pay the bill. Eventually that comes due, and that will happen after you die. Does that mean we believe in hell? Well, no, not exactly. So often you will see in Jewish books a discussion of a place called Gehenna or Gehinnom. It's called different things in different places. This is literally the Valley of Hinnom, as we see in 2 Chronicles and the Kings. This was a place, literally a valley ben Hinnom, that was near Jerusalem, and it was used for the rites of Molech. Molech was an ancient pagan god that people would take their babies and throw them into the fire. Not a good thing, right? So that place, that Ge ben Hinnom, that Gehinnom, that hellish place, became kind of a metaphor, became a synonym for any place of pain, suffering, terrible, nasty, evil things. That's the term that we use when we talk about how a person will feel when they are experiencing the suffering that comes when you find out that you lived your life with that mistake, that you are now being called to task. Does that make sense? All right, so it's not a literal hell. There is no fire and demons and pitchforks and lava and all. No, this is the poetry, like we talked about at the beginning, that for the people of that generation made them think of this is a horrible feeling. This is a horrible sense of pain. That feeling is what the soul would experience for any of the mistakes that it made, but in degree, depending upon the level of mistake. Let me explain it for a little bit more, right? So we got, this is a long one, but bear with me. So the House of Shammai. House of Shammai was one of the great academies back in the days of the Mishnah. He said there will be three groups of people on the day of judgment, when the dead will rise, when they will be judged. There will be the thoroughly righteous, 100% good people. And there will be the thoroughly wicked, 100% bad people. And then there will be everyone else in between, right? Which is like most of the people in the world. The thoroughly righteous will be inscribed and sealed for eternal life. Boom, done, no problem, you're perfect. The thoroughly wicked are immediately inscribed and sealed for Gehenna, as it is written, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to eternal life, and some to eternal shame and everlasting contempt. Right? There will be basically destruction of those that are 100% evil, the Hitlers of the world, if you will. The in-betweeners, the 99% of the world, they will go down to Gehenna. They will have a period of suffering where they realize their mistakes. They will cry out. They will regret them. Their soul will transform, and then they will rise. They will have then a regular good life after life. As it says in Zechariah 13, and I will put this third into the fire and refine them as one refines silver and test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name and I will answer them. And concerning this group, Hannah, from the book of Samuel, said, the Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol, which is another word for meaning the afterlife, and raises up. That's Beit Shammai. That's the house of Shammai's opinion. However, the house of Hillel disagrees. Hillel and Shammai, they're always arguing, right? Because rabbis argue. It's what we do. Hillel said, but God, who abounds in mercy, leans towards mercy. And concerning them, David said, from Psalm 116, I love the Lord because he has heard my voice and my supplications, my begging. And concerning them, David stated the whole passage, the rest of 116, the Lord preserves the simple. When I was brought low, he saved me. What House of Hillel is trying to say here is that there's not going to be some horrible punishment. Yes, there will be a adjustment based on your behavior in this world. There will be justice, but nothing is permanent and nothing is without God's mercy and without God's love. The idea that anyone would ever suffer forever or that anyone would ever be abandoned by God completely is rejected by almost everybody. Yes, Beit Shammai had their opinion. They lost the argument. Right? In Judaism, we almost always follow Beit Hillel because they understood that God is more compassionate. God has more mercy than that. And so, yes, there will be adjustment, there will be punishment, but it will always be limited and it will always be equal to what you did. Right? If you steal $5, the punishment will be $5 worth. If you steal 5 billion, the punishment will be 5 billion worth. But it will never, for anybody, be forever. Because how can a regular person who lives a limited life ever create an infinite punishment? But it just simply does not work, right? No matter how much time I spend committing crimes, I can never commit an infinite number of crimes. I mean, it's just, I'm only one man. Good? Okay. It goes on in the next section. Israelite wrongdoers and Gentile, that means non-Jewish wrongdoers, who follow their bodies, go down to Gehenna, and are judged there for 12 months. The idea that it would be equal to what 12 months feels like in this world. After 12 months, their body is consumed, their soul is burned, and a wind scatters them under the feet of the righteous. As it says in Malachi 4:3, and you shall tread down the wicked, for they will be ashes under the soles of your feet. However, the sectarians, the informers, the heretics, those who deny the Torah, who deny the resurrection of the dead, who separated themselves from the ways of the community, who tyrannized the land of the living, who sinned and caused others to sin, such as Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and his associates, they go down to Gehenna and are judged there for generations, longer feeling than just 12 months. As it says in Isaiah 66, and they shall go forth and look on the dead bodies of the men that rebelled against me, for their worms shall not die, their fire shall not be quenched. The idea being that, yes, for those that are exceptionally wicked and who have caused huge trouble for all of the world, they will have a much larger type of punishment, but even for them, there is still a limit to how much they will suffer. Right? So even when some of our sources seem to indicate eternal or long-lasting punishment, we have to remember that other texts use time in Gehinnom for a way of emphasizing a sin. If they say it was for being, that you go to Gehenna forever because you committed adultery, because you committed murder, and because you embarrassed someone. Do you really think that the rabbi who said that thought that embarrassing a person was just as bad as committing adultery? And do you really think he thought that if you embarrass a person, you will go to Gehinnom and suffer forever? No. But it's a great way to get someone's attention. It's a great way to tell someone that embarrassing another person is a big problem and is bad. Is it really literally that bad? Is it really literally something you would suffer forever for? No. But the hyperbole is very effective at teaching people the lesson that you shouldn't treat embarrassing a person as though it wasn't an important issue. Make sense? Also, in Sanhedrin, in the Talmud, only very specific individuals are singled out for punishment. Again, perhaps for emphasis, like we saw Jeroboam, who was the king that took over the northern kingdom from after Solomon died. He created idolatry, and he basically made the northern kingdom disappear. That's a pretty horrible thing to do. Right? He's responsible for millions and millions of people just being destroyed by the Assyrians later on because of his decisions. That's bad. So when the rabbis talk about forever punishment, sometimes they're just pointing to the super bad people of their times and their generations. Right? The same way that for us, we would probably talk about Hitler nowadays, they would talk about some of those people in the ancient world. And then 3, there is a difference between eternal punishment and failing to reach olam haba, the world to come. In Judaism, we often are going to see this word called olam haba, which can be translated literally to mean the world that's coming, the world to come. That's usually the term that's used for afterlife. But some of the different sources, and this there is debate about, talk about the idea that when a person who is exceptionally bad goes, they get punished, and then they simply stop existing. They're just gone. They're not being punished anymore, but they're also no longer existing even as a soul. That's not forever. It's not forever punishment, but it is forever just deletion. Just like hitting, delete on the computer. It's just gone. Not suffering, not hurting, but just gone. So that's another way that many of the people talk about this. All right. Questions on this line of discussion so far? Okay. So what does it mean then to have a life after death? Right? We've dealt with the judgment and punishment, but what would that life actually be? Well, the idea that there is a life after death does have the most support of all of these topics in the Tanakh, in the Bible, in its texts. However, it's not exactly clear if the life will be a physical life, followed then by a spiritually eternal life, or whether we go straight to spiritual and don't have a second physical life. I will explain both ideas as we go on. So first, proof text, I mentioned at the very beginning, this was the total span of Abraham's life, 175 years, and Abraham breathed his last, dying at a good, ripe age, old and contented. We should all be so lucky. And he was gathered to his kin. Where was Abraham from? Iraq. Ur Kasdim. Was he buried in Iraq? No. Where was Abraham's father buried? And where was his father buried? Haran, which is in Syria. Right? Yeah. Was Abraham buried in Syria? No. So how could he be gathered to his ancestors? The soul, exactly. Right? His body was hundreds of miles from where he was born. His body was hundreds of miles from where his father was buried. But his soul went on, and his soul was reunited with his family. So that's the only way to understand that text. Similarly, with Ishmael, these were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. Then he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his kin. Was Ishmael buried in the same place as Abraham? No, he was not. But does his soul get reunited with his father's soul? Yes, it does. What, you think that Ishmael doesn't deserve Olam Haba? He doesn't deserve the next life? What's wrong? Do you think that, what's that? He is still the son, and whatever things he did that were wrong, after he had been judged and after he has been punished for anything that he did wrong, he's done. Right? This is something that's very hard for most of us to understand because most of us like grudges. Most of us like permanent revenge. Right? If you back into my car and you put a big old dent next to the one that's already there that someone else left, I don't know who did it because they drove off without. Anyway, if you put a dent in my car and I take you to court and I make you pay and you fix my dent, I should be smiling at you after that because You've paid the debt. We're done. But most human beings would still be angry because you dented my car. But the car's fine. It's fixed, right? I paid my debt. I said I'm sorry. Why are you so upset at me? Because you did it. Like, no, but I have fixed what I have done. God understands that we can change, that what we do, we can make right, and we can be punished for it if necessary, and then we are clean. We're done, clear, right? It's just like when you pay your credit card bill, they don't get to ask you to pay it again. When you're clear, right? Yeah, I know, it's a nice idea. The same here, except for most of us, has done something wrong to us, we don't want to just let them be clear, even if they have fixed the problem, even if they have apologized, even if they have changed. We're still holding on to our anger, even though that person is different. God's not like that, thank God. Right? God says, yes, Ishmael made some mistakes. Every human makes mistakes. But after they have paid for their mistakes, after they have been cleansed by the judgment that goes against them, good, they're clean. Why should Ishmael at that point no longer be with his father? Why would Abraham go to Terach, his father, who was an idolater, who worshipped idols? But by the light of the next life, Terach will understand he made mistakes. He'll regret the idols that he made. Why can't he and his son now be together? And he can say to Abraham, you were right all along. I'm sorry I doubted you. Right? They can be together. It's one of the most beautiful parts of the idea of being reunited in the next life, with all of the pain, all of the aggravation, all of the frustration, all of the arguments that we've had with people that we either loved or didn't love in this world, washed away. And then we actually just see them as being beautiful human souls without all of the muck that we do in this life that makes that confusing. Were you going to say something or ask a question? You're okay?
It passed.
It passed. Okay. All right. Moving on to the book of Samuel, we have the story of King David, who makes a really big mistake. David ends up with another person's wife, and he ends up having a baby, and God tells him that baby's going to die. And David is very, very angry. David is very, very sad, and he is on the floor, and he is crying, and he is screaming, and he is begging, and he is praying, and the servants think he's like going completely crazy. And then the baby dies. And the servants talk to each other and they say, what are we going to do? I mean, if he was crazy while the baby was alive, he's going to be worse when we tell them the baby's dead. And none of them. But David notices them and he sees them talking and he goes, the baby's dead, isn't it? And they're like, yes. And he gets up and they're like, but why aren't you freaking out still? And he says, now that he is dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me. So David and that boy will eventually be together. The full spirit of the child, which is not an infant, will be together in that world. But in this world, there's no point in me lying on the ground and fasting. Also in Ecclesiastes, the book of Kohelet, and the dust returns to the dust as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. So yes, our bodies will eventually fall apart. But the spirit does not fall apart. The spirit returns to God. And once more from Samuel 2, Saul and Jonathan, the love in their lives, even in their death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Well, how could they not be divided in death? They're both dead, but their spirits were not divided. And that, again, as Saul and Jonathan, as you may know from the story, that father and son had a lot of trouble between each other. But in death, they were not divided. Okay, point is pretty clear? Good, because Rabbinic Judaism believes mostly, again, there's a little bit of argument, but mostly this is universal agreement, that there will be a period of bodily, physical resurrection at some point for all people in the timeline of the end of days. This is thought to be at some point after the Mashiach, the Messiah, comes, and the world is perfected. This is mentioned repeatedly and stressed in the second prayer of the Amidah, what is called the Givurot. This is the prayer that begins, Ata Gibor, that You can find it on page, what is that page? Like, I just forgot the page. It's 165, 167, 165, I believe. No, 166. 166 in the Musaf service in the Siddur. The idea is that God is called the one who gives life to the dead. Mechaye metim, the one who gives life to the dead. What does this mean? Life after death physically. What does it mean? Did you find it?
Yeah, in my Siddur,
yep.
Is the power of God is like the title.
Yep, exactly. That's what Givurot means, power, right?
No, this is my Siddur.
It's a different, well, I mean, the Hebrew is mostly the same, but it's a different binding. Okay, so what do we mean by this? Well, this is where it gets a little confusing, because we know from other texts, and this one is a summary taken from Rambam, in the world to come, Olam Haba, there is nothing corporeal, nothing physical, no material substance, no flesh, no wood, no metal, no anything. There are only the souls of the righteous without bodies, like the ministering angels. The righteous attain and realization of truth concerning God, to which they had not attained while they were in the murky and lowly body. So Rambam says that yes, there will be a life after death, but that life is going to be not physical. It will be purely spiritual. So it's a little confusing, which is what I warned you at the very beginning. Are you with me so far? Okay. We keep coming back to this term, Olam Haba, the world to come. One of the reasons why this term is hard is because different writers from the rabbis use it to mean different things. So sometimes it means this world, meaning earth, but after Mashiach has come, after the Messiah. That is this same time period, that same time period by other authors is sometimes called Gan Eden, meaning the Garden of Eden. However, some other people sometimes use Gan Eden to mean heaven, the non-physical form. It gets really, really confusing. So that means that Olam Haba can mean the next existence without a body, and that can also mean heaven. So we have lots of words, Olam Haba, Gan Eden, to talk about after we're dead, but some of them are after we're dead but in this world, and some of them are after we're dead but in a next existence, meaning no bodies at all. And you have to read very carefully different authors to know which one are they talking about. It's not always clear. I know I ask if that makes sense like I usually do, but I'm not sure that can make sense. What I'm trying to say is it's hard to try and understand what everyone tries to teach about this, precisely for the reasons we began with. This is not the primary focus of Judaism. This is not the primary focus of why God gave us the Torah. God gave us the Torah so that we could make our souls better in this life. What happens next, God will take care of. And I trust that God will make sure it goes right. And whatever happens next doesn't influence how I choose to live my life now. Okay. Some of you may have heard of the idea of reincarnation in Judaism. Some Jewish groups have begun teaching this, only like in the last 200 years, 300 years, but there is no mention, zero mention of this idea in the Tanakh, in the Bible, or in the rabbinic writings. There's nothing in Midrash, there was nothing in Mishnah, there was nothing in the Talmud that talks about reincarnation at all. And in fact, the idea, quite honestly, breaks the system. It doesn't work, right? Because a soul has one journey for which it will be judged. A body cannot be rewarded or punished for the previous actions of the soul in a different body. All right, let's imagine that I was a murderer in my previous life, reincarnated into this life. Should I get cancer now because I was a murderer before? I have no memory of those crimes. This body didn't commit those crimes. I cannot fix those crimes because I have no awareness of them. I can't even regret those crimes. What would be the point of punishing this body and making me, this body and this soul suffer now? So that my soul would learn? But how can my soul learn if my soul can't speak to my body and make choices in this life? Judaism, mainstream Judaism, 99% of Jews and 99% of Jews who live throughout history do not believe in reincarnation. Unfortunately, some very popular groups are starting to talk about this now, and it's making things more confused and annoying. There's also logical reasons of why reincarnation in general doesn't work, and many apologies to those who are Buddhists and Hindu. The problem is still for them as well, not only for Jews who have this idea, right? There's logical problems. Because if you look at a population graph of the world, the population goes like this. There are more than 8 billion people alive now. That means you need 8 billion souls. How many people were alive at the beginning of the 20th century? Barely a billion. Where did the 7 billion new souls come from? That would mean every year, more and more of the souls in the world are brand new. So wait, that means the world is getting dumber and dumber as all of the souls are getting newer and newer and newer. And there are only a few old souls that are around that are really close to getting it right. Again, the logic doesn't make sense. Now, some people try to say, well, yes, but the animals have souls too, and the animal soul can become a human soul. I've read a book, Jewish author, well-respected, who talked about if you were a lazy person in this life, you'll be reincarnated as a bee so that you have to work all the time. Except in Judaism, we don't believe that animals are judged. So how can I be a good bee? How do I improve on that? How do I make myself into a better bee so I'm no longer going to be made a bee for the life after that, right? The time spent in a non-human form would be pointless. So Judaism as a whole does not believe in reincarnation, despite some small groups who make a lot of noise about this. Questions on this?
What about they have this Chazon HaAtzamot HaYeveshot, the days of the Mashiach.
To the Mashiach in a second, but yeah, but the idea of
these are a group of people that decided to leave Egypt before it's time. Died
right
in the desert.
Yes.
So they supposedly reincarnated when the Mashiach comes.
So there's a difference between reincarnate and resurrect. So reincarnate means my soul in a new body. Resurrect means my soul in my body made out of, God can make whatever he wants. Out of molecules, think Star Trek, just, and I've got a new body. So the idea of the resurrection, as we talked about, that is perfectly fine and mainstream in Rabbinic Judaism. That I've died, my body is turned to dust because it's been 1,000 years, the Mashiach comes, and now my body is okay again, maybe the same dust or maybe new dust, because does God need to use the same dust? Like God can't just make more? And my soul is now in a body walking around the earth, but it's still me. And it's still, me remembering what I am and who I am and all of that. It's not me as a bear. It's not me as a girl in Ireland. It's me. So many of the people who talk about, those that were unfortunate, who died before they had a chance to experience everything, like those who left Egypt earlier, they will have a chance to live in the perfection that they should have. And that will bring us to our discussion of Mashiach. But the idea of being reincarnated, usually they mean that before the days of the Messiah come. Which again, if we're waiting for people to get perfect, will never happen because we're just getting more and more new souls as the population continues to grow. So the souls are, in general, all kindergartners. Okay, the Mashiach, the Messiah. First of all, you have to understand, in Hebrew, the Mashiach means that someone has been anointed. They have had oil put on their head. That's literally what it means. What that means is they have been appointed, they have been chosen for a particular job. So a prophet might be anointed. A king was always anointed in the biblical world. It was just a way of saying, you've been picked, you've been selected. But when we talk about the Mashiach, the Messiah, we mean a very particular person who is chosen. Now, this next section here is from Rambam's Mishnah Torah again. This is actually a section that was cut out by the Christians. They heavily edited many of our books during the Middle Ages because they didn't like what we said. And one of the things that we said was what we believe is necessary to know who is the Messiah. And spoiler alert, it's not Jesus. So they said, cut it out of the book or we'll kill you. So we cut it out of the book. Thankfully, there were many Jews who didn't live in Christian Europe, and they were able to keep it. And that's how we still have this section. But what he's talking about here is a summary taken from the words of the prophets, put together through the ages by the rabbis of the Talmud and the Midrash to try and give us a picture of what does it mean to be the Mashiach at the end of days. So, if a king should arise from the house of David, who is versed in Torah and engages in commandments, as did David his forefathers, in accordance with both the written and oral Torahs. So, criteria number 1, you have to be a king from the house of David. Okay, that's not so bad. Criteria number 2, you have to be somebody who actually knows Torah. Right? You can't be the guy who's out murdering people. You have to be a good and righteous person. And you may laugh, but we had lots of kings that were really bad kings. In fact, most of the Jewish kings were bad kings. If you read the book of Kings, you'll see most of them rotten kings. So, from David, a good person who keeps Torah, keeps it in the way that it is supposed to be kept. And he enjoins all of Israel to follow its ways and encourages them to repair its breaches. So he makes everybody also want to keep Torah. All right, so he is a good person, and he helps make other people good people. So he's a teacher, ultimately. Right? He's a king, but he's also a teacher. He's a role model, and he's somebody that brings people after him. And he fights the wars of God, which means that he is fighting against the evil of the world. Then he may be presumed to be the Messiah. We can say, you know what? He is a candidate. You okay? That we can say he is a maybe Messiah. And there have been a few. Bar Kokhba was the most famous one back in the years 136. He was the most famous maybe candidate, although not everybody thought he was a good candidate because not everyone thought he was a good person. But he's still just a temporary maybe candidate. If he succeeds in his efforts and defeats the enemies around and builds the sanctuary, meaning the Temple of Jerusalem, in its proper place, and gathers the dispersed of Israel, he is definitely the Messiah. Now, you'll notice something here. Any miracles? No miracles. Right? No miracle. I mean, it would be a miracle if it happened, kind of miracle, but no raising people from the dead, no fishes and loaves, right? No walking on water. The Messiah is the Messiah because the Messiah succeeds. And when the Messiah succeeds, you'll know it because the world will be at peace and Israel will be at peace and the people will be gathered. The temple will be rebuilt. Now, I was in Israel just last summer. There is no third temple. There are still Jews suffering in many parts of the world. We're not there yet. So that means anybody who has been alive and is now dead is not the Messiah. It's very simple. You get one life, and if you don't do it while you're alive, good try, you were a nice candidate, please make way for the next generation. No crime for trying, but you weren't the Messiah. You following the understanding here? Okay. If he does not succeed in these matters, or he is killed, we will know that he was not the one the Torah promised. He is merely to be considered like all the other exemplary and qualified kings of the house of David who have died. Right? Hezekiah, great guy mostly, but you know what? He died. He's not the Messiah. Josiah, great king mostly, but he died. Not the Messiah. David, not the Messiah, because they died before everything was made perfect the way God wanted. Right? God set him up only to try the masses. As it says, and some of the wise will stumble to refine among them and to purify and to make white, even to the end of to the time of the end, for it is yet for the appointed time, from the book of Daniel. Basically meaning there will be candidates who will look likely, but if they fail or if they die, then they weren't. They were just maybe. And maybe they were nice people, but you should be careful. You do not actually believe the person is the Messiah until it is possible, until it is finally done. You can support them and support the good work they're doing, but don't think after they died that they were the Messiah, because once they die and the job's not done, they're disqualified. Okay. Nonetheless, Rambam goes on, the thoughts of the Creator of the world are beyond any man's understanding. For our ways are not his ways, our thoughts are not his thoughts. And all the doings of Jesus of Nazareth and that of the Ishmaelite, meaning Muhammad, who came after him, are nothing but to pay the way for the King Messiah and prepare the entire world to worship God together. As it says, for then I will turn to the people a pure language, that they may call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent. That's from Zephaniah. So what is he saying here? And again, this was deleted by the Christians, and the Muslims didn't like it either. Basically, what Rambam is saying here is that, look, Jesus wasn't the Messiah, but Christianity's been helpful, because Christianity, with all of its problems, and it has had plenty over 2,000 years, did help spread the idea of there being only one God. It did help try to move people away from worshiping idols. It did help to get the idea of commandments and the idea of living a good and moral life spread to a wider audience. Right? It wasn't Zeus with lightning bolts and raping, women to make Hercules. It was an idea of a good God. We disagree with a lot of what Christianity did. We especially disagree with what a lot of Christians did, who did it in the name of their religion, but did horrible, horrible things. But it did move the world closer. And the same thing with Islam. Yes, we disagree with many points of Islam, but what Saudi Arabia was like before Muhammad came, it wasn't such a nice place. And people worshiped rocks and sticks and stuff. They were idol worshippers of the worst order. And if you look at many of the places where Islam went, the cultures that it helped transform had been extremely bloody before Islam came there. And Islam did improve their culture and their peace. I know that nowadays people have a very different idea of what Islam is, but if you study the history and you look at what came before the Muslim conquest, you can realize that many of those places did actually improve. It would have been better without the blood. It would have been better without the wars. It would have been better without the persecution and horrible tyranny that came with it. Yes, of course. But, as he says, our ways are not God's ways. It seems, in his opinion, that maybe God is using Christianity and Islam to help get the rest of the world pointed in the right direction. They're not perfect, and they're definitely not the messiahs from our point of view, but they are helpful, at least when they're not killing us. Make sense? Said Samuel, the only difference, though, this is from the Talmud, the only difference between this age and the day of the Messiah and Israel's is Israel's subjugation to the kingdoms of the world alone. As it is said, for a poor shall never cease out of the land. So what Samuel here in the Talmud is trying to say, this is not the prophet Samuel, but the rabbi Samuel. What he is trying to say here is there aren't going to be miracles in the day of the Messiah. People will still have jobs. People will still need to farm, and they will still need food, and they will still need to work. The difference will be that there won't be human-caused suffering or human-allowed suffering. Because there is so much in this world that we cause to happen and that we can prevent from happening. As we are here with the pandemic now of the coronavirus, we know that if we as humanity have been working together for the last 2,000 years, we would have conquered all of these diseases. No problem. Look at how much we've already conquered in the last 100 years. We could have done more for 2,000 years if we've been actually working at it. Look at if we took all the resources that we have used for war. If every human country on earth had said, we're not going to do war, we're going to study medicine. We're going to study science. We're going to find the best ways to farm. We're going to find the best ways to help everyone. Yes, you would still have a job. You would still need to work. But would there be any shortages? Would there be anybody who didn't have clean water? No, we'd be able to solve all those problems. The Messiah is not going to wave a magic wand and make the world better. The Messiah is going to wake us up so that we make the world better. Because right now, we're all kind of half asleep. Right? Do not presume, this is back in Rambam, do not presume that in the Messianic age, any facet of the world's nature will change and there will be innovations in the work of creation. God is not changing, right? The sun is still going to rise. The moon is still going to be there. There will still be clouds. There will still be rain. The world is going to stay naturally as it is. Rather, the world will continue according to its pattern. Although Isaiah 11:6 says, the wolf will dwell with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the young goat, these words are a metaphor and a parable. Sorry, little aside. 20 years ago, I was watching TV on a Sunday morning, and back in the days of flipping channels, no streaming, I came across a preacher, a Christian preacher, who was talking about Isaiah 11 and talking about the miracle that God would make happen, where even lions and lambs would be able to be together. Well, first of all, you see, it's not a lion and a lamb, right? That is a misunderstanding. It's always been a lamb. But to prove his point, he had a lamb and he had an old circus lion sitting down next to each other. But the trainer of the lion had a very large bucket full of meat. And while the preacher was preaching, the trainer was throwing the meat into the lion's mouth to keep it from eating the lamb, because that would have ruined the speech. That's not what's going to happen, right? That's not what's going to happen. That is a metaphor. How do we interpret the prophecy? We interpret it as follows. Israel will dwell securely together with the wicked Gentiles who are likened to a wolf and a leopard, as is the prophecy of Jeremiah 5, a wolf from the wilderness shall spoil them, and a leopard will stalk their cities. The same way Jeremiah talks about a wolf and a leopard attacking us, eventually the wolf and the leopard will be with us. It's a metaphor. It just means the nations of the world will be at peace. It doesn't mean lions aren't going to eat lambs anymore. It just means lion people, leopard people, wolf people will not be behaving that way anymore. Everyone will realize that treating other people like something to eat is wrong. Which would be nice if people realized that earlier, but we're getting there. They will return to the true faith and no longer steal or destroy. Rather, they will eat permitted food at peace with Israel, as Isaiah 11:7 says, the lion will eat straw like an ox. Does that mean a lion is actually going to be eating grass? No. It means lion-like people will no longer be eating weak people. You're not going to have weak and strong people fighting anymore. We will all just be people, and we can all be at peace and secure together. Sounds nice, right? Better than the zoo vision. All right, so how do we know when the Messiah is coming? Well, there are some sages who say that Elijah's coming will precede the coming of the Mashiach. That first will be Elijah, and then will be the Messiah. All these and similar matters cannot be definitely known by man until they occur. For these matters are undefined in the prophet's words, and even the wise men have no established tradition regarding these matters except their own interpretation of the verses. Therefore, there is controversy among them regarding these matters. That means there are lots of people who want to tell you they know that we are living in the end of days, that the Messiah is coming in 2024, that the Messiah is coming in 2036, that the Messiah is coming, they keep pushing the date back. Remember, it was 2012 recently. And then, the Mayan calendar, all of that? No. If you look in the works of the great rabbis, there are different rabbis who have opinions, but no one says this is what it is. No one gives a fixed date. Regardless of the debate concerning these questions, neither the order of the occurrence of these events or their precise details are among the fundamental principles of faith. This is not the most important thing. A person should not occupy themselves with agadot, the teachings around this, and the homiletics, the various sermons concerning these and similar matters, nor should he consider them as essentials, for study of them will neither bring fear or love of God. Similarly, one should not try to determine the appointed time for the Mashiach's coming. Do not figure out the calendar date. It's going to be the 12th of August. No. In that era, There will be neither famine or war, envy or competition for goodwill, or envy or competition, comma, for goodwill will flow in abundance, and all the delights will be freely available as dust. By dust, he means it's cheap, right? No one has to pay for dirt because you can just find it anywhere. And everything that's good in the world will be available as freely as though they could just pick it off the ground. That's the vision, which you'll notice the vision of the Messiah in this world is that there will no longer be human suffering. That is the template. Whenever we talk about redemption or salvation in Judaism, we're talking about an end to suffering in life. That's why Jews have been so active in so many different programs around the world trying to help end suffering. People take this very, very seriously, that yes, the Messiah will come and then it will all be good. But in the meantime, we can make it a little better if we try. And that should be our focus, not figuring out what day the Messiah is going to arrive. Any questions? Any comments? Okay, then we're good for tonight, or this afternoon still. Thank you all very much.